Thank you, everybody. Mary, I'm sorry I didn't pull up your bio just yet. Would you do us the honors of um, sharing a little bit about your background? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's okay. Yeah, I'm a public artist. I'm located in Phoenix. I've been here for about 10 years, and also family in Arizona for generations. I got into public art right after college, which is kind of unusual. I've been doing this for about 25 years, and I kind of work in all sorts of media, try to make my pieces as specific to a location as possible. And I do a lot of transit projects.
Thank you, Mary. We've got lots of folks logging in now. I'm really excited to get started. Mary, thank you for reviewing with us. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you are a participant or one of our presenters, if you're not giving a presentation at the time, if you could just keep yourself on mute. During the presentation, we are recording this to be posted later, as Nicole said. So that will help us preserve our sound recording. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box. We're going to monitor that chat box as we go and try to stop and ask questions about each of the artists' work in between as we have time. And then at the end, we will have some more time for questions for all four of our presenters. So in order to get started, we're going to start with Dan Droz. Dan, if you will unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about your work. I'm going to go through your slides and just tell me when to go to the next one.
Hi. Thanks, Katie, and also thank you, Mary. A little bit of background. I had a career as an industrial designer and educator at Carnegie Mellon, and 3 years ago I decided to retire at the age of 68 from all those activities to devote full-time to sculpture. So this kind of learning process has been really terrific for me, and thank you to the ISC and to all of you in Phoenix. I chose some pieces that sort of represent those that might have some possibilities in a public sphere because some of the things that I'm doing are big, and I think that public art would be a great place to put them rather than sitting around my studio. And so that first piece is about 4.5, 5 feet tall. It's a totem. As you can see there and in subsequent pieces, a lot of my technique involves taking large panels of metal, aluminum, and scoring them with various means, and then folding them almost like kirigami. There's usually no welding or fabricating, just folding into some form. You can go to the next one. This is has a little bit of welding involved, but same idea. This one is called Pisa Sunset. This one's about 6.5 feet tall. And some of these pieces have found places in people's backyards, but I would actually, in fact, the last slide indicates where I'd like to be going is to make much larger pieces. Right now, I just have 100 maquettes around waiting for someone to say, yeah, that'll be really nice, 20 feet tall. And I should say, and maybe at the end of this, I can maybe comment on some of the great advice I got from Mary and Katie. You can go to the next one, Katie. One of the things that I also was trying to figure out is how to ship these pieces or move them from place to place. So I began, apart from just folding, to slotting pieces so that they could interlock and then they could be taken apart and either screwed back together easily or just slotted. So this piece actually comes apart. Those pieces, much like some of the pieces that you might be familiar with Noguchi, sort of had various elements that interlocked and that they can be changed or moved around, reconfigured. So it serves two purposes. You can go to the next one, Katie. this is a piece that's sort of in a private park, a piece of private property in the Eastern Shore, and it's about 6 or 7 feet tall. This was actually one of the first pieces that I had done. I had my first show in 2018 and had no idea what would sell, or and so this was one of the first pieces that I had made, and actually the first piece that I actually sold. I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I'll just keep making big pieces and people will buy them and put them in their backyard. You can go to the next one. This is called In the Park. This piece was just selected to go to a public space in Washington, D.C. Also, one of the first pieces, that's 2018 also. Most of my pieces are powder coated, and that means they can usually only be done in one color. This happens to be enamel because I wanted to try different colors. It's not quite as good outside. But one of the great suggestions I think Katie or Mary made was to use a kind of surface treatment, cement spelled backwards, Temetic, or however it's pronounced, which I'm looking into. Thank you for that, whoever suggested that. Was that you, Mary? Or Katie? Okay. You can go to the next one, Katie. This is what I'm usually making now is maquettes. This is about 16 or 17 inches tall. And there was an exhibition in Pittsburgh that was co-sponsored by the Cleveland Sculpture Institute, Cleveland Sculpture Center, that was about words in sculpture. This spells out community using letters as sculptural forms. You can go to the next one. This is Thought Process, which also is in someone's backyard. It's about 6.5 feet tall also. This is not folding, but just forming long bars of aluminum. And then is the next one the final one? Oh no, this is also one of my first pieces. And I wondered why this didn't sell if the other one sold, because I liked that one better. But that's still in my studio. I think this would be very nice in your backyard, Jerry. I guess now, and so this one prompted some conversation with, I think, you, Mary, or Katie. This is a commission that I got for a building in Pittsburgh. So it's not going to be installed. Whoops. It's not going to be installed until January or February of next year. But this is the first piece that is in the zone of what I'd like to be doing. And it's for a commercial property, not a public space per se, but it's kind of the scale that I would like to be doing. And I think your comment, Mary, was that's great, but never show a rendering at a presentation, or not at a presentation, but as an example of your work. So wisely noted. So that's the body of work that I was used to sort of exemplify some of the things that I'm doing and want to do. And what came out of it was, I thought, probably 9 or 10 great suggestions. I don't know if you wanted me to run through those or mention those, Katie, but I can, or you can also reflect on those too.
Thank you for sharing. Mary, why don't we just
10
start?
minutes, 10 minutes.
That was perfect timing, Dan. That was perfect timing. Mary, why don't we talk a little bit about some of the feedback that you gave Dan on his work?
Sure, I'll just start with this one because it's up and we've been talking about it. The comment was specifically about initial slides when you're responding to an RFQ. I would never put in a rendering, and it's so tempting if you have a commission, you want to demonstrate that this is on the way. Resist that temptation. Wait until you actually have the built thing. And I think Dan's other slides show a really great example of what you can do without having your first commission, which is he has a combination of pieces that are a certain scale outside that are built, that are showing that he knows how to create something that stands up, that works well in a space, and also shows all the kind of 3D design skills that he has that he's bringing to it. So he has plenty with his other work to show without having to show the concept of the piece that he wants to. If I see this piece and I look like, oh, it's nearly 6 feet high, I have a sense that he knows how to construct that. It shows skill with color and form and all these other things. Of his pictures photographs that are outside, this one in particular, I think is an illustration of something where it's a really elegant form and it's being distracted by what's in the background. There was a piece a few slides back, I think you said it was your first commission of the big rectangular red form in the park. I think that was a really good, you could crop this a little bit, but it's so striking. You look at this, you can see, this is a monumental piece in a landscape. This is how it works. And it's easily understandable to people. And it's the visually enticing, like the red and the green, just if you look at it as an abstract artwork, this photograph is quite nice to look like, which is always a nice thing. Color is good. Oh, and the other thing we mentioned, Dan didn't have any of his photographs of his interior smaller pieces, but there's stuff on his website that both Katie and I kind of went gaga about. There was some glorious colors and some really inventive ways of using color that reflected off the walls that we thought was, Dan was mentioning his pieces are powder coated, which often limits you to one color. These interior pieces had glorious combinations of lots of color. And we suggested that just because something is small doesn't mean you shouldn't include it. That a panel, if it's paired with something like this slide and that slide of these big pieces that show your capacity to work with something big, that showing something glorious and special, that shows another kind of layer or aspect of the way you think as an artist, especially because all your pieces, Dan, it's so obvious that you really enjoy color, and this was an expression of that. So they were related. It wasn't kind of like you started showing, I don't know, watercolors of fish that were like, well, what does this have to do with each other? The pieces, they had the geometry in common, they had the color in common. So it expanded kind of the range of how I could see your work, but also it was a cohesive whole, like, oh, these were obviously done by the same artist.
Yeah, I would emphasize, don't hesitate from showing things that are inside as well as outside. And I'm not sure that I mentioned this on Dan's review, but I want to mention this to the larger group. Dan does have some really great things on his website that weren't in his cache of slides that he shared with us. Don't assume that a panelist is going to go to your website because they might not be able to. It might be an anonymous selection panel and they might not have access to your website. And if they have 300 artists to review, they're probably not going to have the time to Google every single artist and go check out their website. So if you want them to see an image of your work, you need to make sure you include it in your slides, and don't assume that they will have the time or the ability even to go and see your website as well.
And I'm going to take that even one step further. You put together these packets, and you have a artist statement, and you have descriptions of these things. And it's very possible that when you're going through slides, people will say, "Tell me more about this red thing," and then they'll be able to read it. Sometimes you're on panels and you're going through slides so quickly that there really isn't the time to catch all of those "let me explain." So I try to make my slides as clear as humanly possible. I want someone who has never seen this work before to be able to glance at it in a couple seconds, say, "I understand what that is." So when you think about how you're presenting that slide, and I think there are a couple of examples in the other artists that are good illustrations to talk about this. I think, Dan, you have an advantage of your things are so visually clear that it's very easy for me to say, that's a sculpture, probably made out of metal. I'm guessing it's about 6 feet high, including the base, and the context of the stairs makes me understand the size of it. That's all very, very helpful.
I think one other thing that we sort of talked about with Dan that we might want to mention is the different types of opportunities to apply for. Dan has some experience and I think work that really lends itself to public art and private development commissions rather as like a way to enter into this public art space.
Yeah.
And
He
so
does
we
so
talked.
many pieces. Sorry.
That's
He
good.
does
Go ahead, Mary.
so many pieces that are standalone sculptures, and often there are. So there's public art, which is like cities commissioning pieces, and then there's private development, which often or sometimes cities have requirements where a development over a certain number of square feet has to have some public art component. There aren't that many cities, but there are. But there are certainly loads. I mean, any city you walk around, you're going to see in front of an office building or inside a mall, you're going to see standalone sculptures. And the advantage of those is that they're often on very much shorter timelines. You know, it'll be 6 months instead of 5 years before you get something in. And it's a lot less complex. You're dealing with a lot fewer moving parts if you're just providing them a piece that goes on a plinth or in a plaza. And so I thought because Dan's pieces were standalone, he might be a really good candidate for that sort of work. And often the thing about private development is it's more of a casual, you find those because of, an architect or somebody's seen your work and they recommend you to somewhere. So often there aren't lists of calls to apply to. So it's a different kind of way of navigating the public art space. But I should say, these standalone things, the smaller pieces that I saw on your website, we all thought would be kind of glorious as part of the fabric of a building. So like the outside of a parking garage or the inside of working into a stair rail in a academic building or something like that. So I think he has both sort of things could be good opportunities.
Wonderful suggestions. Wonderful. And in fact, that private project, that last slide that was the rendering, is a commercial project, and really the first really large piece that I've gotten. And that opportunity really is a stepping stone to people seeing that that I can do larger pieces.
So we have a couple of specific questions related to Dan's work that I want to make sure we cover before we move on. Jerry would like to know, Dan, what thickness of metal do you use particularly for your outdoor work?
I started with 8-inch aluminum, 6064. If you're familiar with alloys, that's an important thing in aluminum, the particular kind of aluminum you're using. And I switched to 3/16. For that larger piece, that's probably going to be 1/2 inch, and I'll have to weld that together because it's kind of hard to fold 1/2 inch aluminum. So it's generally up to about 5 feet. I'm good with 8-inch. Anything above that, 3/16. And anything above that, it starts to get into more of an engineering issue.
And then we have one other question from Karen. How do you find private development commissions? Karen, did we get that question answered for you?
Just in my experience, it's more of a word of mouth sort of thing. So to develop relationships with people who are the people who you might want to be clients would be the way to do it.
Thanks, Mary.
I should say I've only done one.
Another place that's just kind of occurred to me as a great way to sort of a transition space is to look for like airport public art programs that may be looking for freestanding sculptures. I know the Phoenix Airport Museum program sometimes puts out a call for freestanding sculptures. They do focus more on Arizona artists, but if you look at your airport in your state or your region,
And
their
you will
airport
see,
public art programs.
you'll see on Cafe, for instance, calls for loans for temporary pieces where they'll pay you a certain amount, and they give you a plinth and you put their work on for a year or 3 years or something like that. The other thing I wanted to mention as a potential way of doing of being found as for private development is some cities have slide banks. I know the city of Tempe does. I know the city of Nashville at least did. And those are kind of a public services. These are artists in the community. This is the type of work they do, and developers can use that if they need to find somebody. So I would look around for those slide banks and see if you can, or image registries, and see if you can include your work. Those often have calls that are renewed once every 3 years or something.
I'm getting a thumbs up from Karen.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. All right. Dan, thanks so much. We're going
Thank
to
you.
move on to Paula's work. And then again, if anyone has more questions coming up, type them in the chat box and we'll revisit back to them later. Paula, will you share a little bit with us about yourself and your work?
Hello, I'm from Belen, New Mexico, which is a little small town in the middle of the state. And my path for both art and public art has been kind of wavy. I never studied art in high school, in college, but grew up in a family of makers, more like industrial sorts of things, and grew up with a lot of scrap, and of course in a really interesting, historically interesting community with amazing environment. And so I think that inspired me to become an artist. I had lots of success as a young artist with like gallery type of success, museum success regionally, you know, in terms of what I imagined it to be. And then by the time I was in my mid 40s, I was really disenchanted with the gallery scene. Although I had done it was sort of like a one-off public art competition, one or two, and was fortunate to get those. But I redirected myself, and late in life, I got an MFA from the University of New Mexico, and I really focused on storytelling and contemporary theory and environment. And it's really a mesmerizing process for me. Public art competitions are like a muse to me. They're really, and I know Mary can speak to this really well, but they're just so different from any other sort of career path. But for me, they are so much fun. I love the research involved. I love connecting with communities and thinking about places really deeply, and rarely getting one. So anyway, this is what I was asked to do when I did my beginning interface with Mary and Katie was tell us why you picked this slide. I will tell you that a big issue that they summarized for me were my photographs. And I will tell you a great piece of advice that Mary told me at the end of the presentation. But I wanted to say real quickly, because I think it was Karen who had this question about where to find these private development commissions. Another place is there are listservs that are sort of subscription based, and I've done some of those sometimes, and I found that, and I'm so sorry, I can't remember the name of one, but it really focuses on the artist as client, which is maybe a little, doesn't feel quite great. Although unlike Cafe, where it's the site that's the client, but I did in my 1 year.
CodaWorks?
It's CodaWorks, yes. In my 1 year with them, they would seek me out for specific things and say, "Would you be interested in this?" And they were all this private development stuff. So that's something to think about. So this piece that I'm showing here, I liked it because I thought it was a good photograph. It's not quite as good as it could be, And this is a temporary installation for what was formerly the College of Santa Fe, and it was a collaboration with an architect for a site and projects that were happening in Santa Fe. And this is made completely with recycled plugs, punch-out steel that I purchased from local fabricators. These can also serve as functional pieces. And I hesitated to mention that, but both Mary and Katie said, absolutely, read the call, see if it's something that they might be interested in terms of functional, and then talk about it for that particular slide. So you can go to the next one, Katie. This is a piece I did for the New Mexico History Museum. It was one of 4 pieces that I did for this new building, and it was definitely the building was being built as I won the competition, and so it was a really great place to interact with both the contractor who built the building and the architects who were part of the design in the community. I chose this piece because someone at New Mexico Art said, make sure you include this piece. It's not the best photograph, Mary told me, because of the shadow is too dramatic and it might be difficult to read. She also advised that that it was great to have a person because of scale, but try to include their feet, it's distracting otherwise. That was made from laser cut steel. This is a piece I did for Fort Lewis College. There was a biology department renovation in Durango, Colorado. And this site in this corner of the biology department was a place where they dumped snow, like clearing it from the sidewalks and the campus. And so I thought it would be a really sort of cool, interesting environmental interaction to have a place that they could dump snow on, and there would be this interaction between a sculpture and the piece. This was inspired by the cryptobiotic crusts in the Colorado Plateau. It's called Fallen Petals. It's made from sheared corten steel pipe that then I came back through and hammered, not all the pieces, but some of them to create. You know, I really want something that's interesting and organic, but not over the top. I want something that's subtle, but sort of radiant. And I picked this one. One of the comments that both Mary and Katie made on this slide, maybe more Mary, was that don't try to present horizontal images. They read better and people have access to a larger feeling from the picture. Other comments about this image was that it looks odd, the angle that I'm photographing it at. The building behind looks almost distorted, and don't be afraid to use software to correct those sorts of things. You're not changing your image. The image exists, but help to frame it better for the viewer. So the next one, this is the same piece. This was photographed immediately after installation. One of the things for me about this piece was I really wanted to create a footing that was as minimal as possible to sort of honor like the idea of impermeable surfaces and rainfall and water, et cetera. So, and also to have the piece really be at the ground plane, directly engaging the viewer. I think that was fairly successful. The problem with this particular photograph is that it was taken right after the installation, so the landscape isn't fully in. The colors maybe are too similar throughout, and even though it's a good horizontal shot. Okay, you can go to the next one. This is Blue Flower. This is a piece I did. It was a collaboration between UNESCO and the city of Santa Fe. I was selected to create a piece for a city in Korea. And so the goal for me was to tell a story that connected Korea with New Mexico. And so this piece honored the New Mexico and Korean war dead in the Korean War. This is done with laser cut steel. The one thing I didn't say in my initial visit, was that one of the exciting things about this particular piece for me is that I am self-taught CAD, and it's not something that's remote, or as people used to say, it's not rocket science. And I was really thrilled that I was able to communicate with people in another country who we did not share the same language, but we were able to communicate numerically. That was super exciting. This piece is, the photograph is terrible, although Mary says it's not that bad, but it's actually a photograph from the catalog from UNESCO. I lost the disc that they sent to me, and I just never was able to get the original photos from this project. So Katie also had some comments about the glare and the way I did it, but I'm going to go back and try to rework this. This is done with laser cut steel. It's 66 separate panels. I think that there's 10 different ones that I used to create this piece, and this is 6 feet by 6 feet by 6 feet. Okay, next. This is my most recent piece. This is another New Mexico piece. This is done for the National Hispanic Cultural Center, which is a really important site in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. It's our most visited museum. It's equivalent to the African American National Cultural Center in DC, but it is in Albuquerque, and it was designed by world famous architect Antoine Predock, and there was these Mayan steps, and then this raised, I call it like a levitated box between the two of them, and then you could enter underneath, and it was a really unused space on campus. The call, which I tend to really focus on what people want for the calls, although sometimes I've noticed that committees forget what they asked for, but but this one they wanted, this was part of a part of the campus called the Plaza Mayor, which is a huge campus for community celebrations, and they didn't want a stand-alone sculpture, and they wanted something that was iconic, and also celebrated the progenitors of this museum, which has a long history in Albuquerque and New Mexico and in Indo-Hispanic culture. And so I saw this box, I went underneath it and saw the potential for this unbelievable shadow play, and asked the architect if I could do something with it. And I was so shocked that everybody said yes. I used a drone to actually do the measurements, because even though in the architectural plans, this is all plumb, it was not in actual fabrication. So that was a really cool thing. And Katie will show you the next slide. And then underneath, there's a really beautiful sitting place. This is about, I think it's like 26 feet up in the air. And it's this really private little space, but within the context of this larger campus. This is laser cut steel. The arches at the bottom are actually a ½ inch, 3/16 for the other plate. And then there's also some of this byproduct that I use in some of my other work. And then now the next. And this is the last slide. Not unlike what Dan was talking about, I was told this is a rendering for a project I just actually presented for. I'm a finalist for a project in Denver. This is right near the Civic Center, Golden Triangle. This is a Polish architect, Libeskind, who did the contemporary Denver Art Museum behind it. This is a really interesting site, because there was a plinth that was created to just retain grade. It had no function whatsoever, but they wanted an artwork on the plinth. They were looking more for a beacon, and I proposed this trestle. Anyway, but Katie and Mary both said to me, don't include renderings from, even though you're really proud about it, that you're a finalist for something and that you're proud of it, and you're proud of your capabilities with this, but they said, don't, it's distracting. So that's it.
Cool.
Just to reiterate a little bit about the proposals there, Mary and I loved hearing about both Dan and Paula's proposals, but our point was it's difficult for panelists to make the leap from what you're proposing for another project to they're trying to imagine you proposing something for them too. So seeing a proposal for another project that you focused on making that proposal so perfect for that project, it's difficult for a panel to select you based on your potential by seeing your proposal for another project. Once it's built, yes, take really good pictures of it and submit it. And I would say if you make it through the first round and you're coming back as a finalist, and you need to impress upon them to show that you know how to do these type of rendering skills, then that's a good time to say, okay, I've done this rendering for this other program. I can do this for you. But yeah, it's not a criticism at your proposals at all. And
Of course,
Max,
yeah, of course
No,
not.
yeah,
And
yeah.
can I say one thing? May I say one thing? And then I just wanted to come back to for me, what was the most important thing that you all shared with me, which is, and Mary, you said it so beautifully. You said, you put a lot of work into your pieces. So once it's installed, don't just walk off and take a picture with your iPhone. Take some nice pictures, focus on it, really learn about this, and look at other artists' work and how they photographed it. Learn about this. This is part of your craft. And I really appreciate it. It was great advice. So thank you very much.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Katie was saying, I think there are two things that a proposal. There's one thing that a proposal does really, really well, which works well in the if you're in front of a panel and you're able to talk through something with them, is to show your working process and your thought process. And it's an opportunity to tell a story of kind of the life cycle of a project. That can include these, I can work with CAD, I'm thinking about the site in this way. But the thing it can't really do is it doesn't show you the final project. And I don't think I've ever proposed something that ended up being what I ended up building, because things change so much. There's so many circumstances. So I want to see what ends up being in the ground. Because that's what we all care about, is what the end product is. How you get there is really interesting when you have time to kind of have that conversation. But Paula, I think the very first image, which I gotta say is clearer now than it was when we had our full conversation. So I actually like the photograph better than that.
It's called primacy. It's called primacy bias.
Yeah. No, it's clear. I think there was something about the way the image was coming through. But I think this, I love this, especially as the first image. And I think this is doing all the things I was saying, which is it is not only a document of a really interesting piece, and I love the kind of strange, I've never seen cube-like forms stretched like that before. And I love being able to see the texture and how these were made. And the one comment I had for Paula was if you can go through in Photoshop and just bring out those highlights a little bit so it's easier for me to see how they were made. But I think the thing that this has done really, really well is not only looking at the photograph as a document of this three-dimensional object that you create, but thinking about it as a two-dimensional image. And this showing up, you're in a panel and you've seen 30 other people's work, and then you see this, and this is a striking image, and I think that's fantastic. And so my comment to Paula was that, especially again in her private work, she had these amazing sculptures on her website that had all this texture and detail, and the photograph brought out all the little shiny highlights and deep shadows. And I want that for her public artwork too, especially like the piece that was done at the university, the horizontal piece.
Oh, right. Yes.
We were both talking about how wonderful that would look like with snow underneath it, with shadows casting. But these are very flat light, which can be useful in some circumstances. But this would be a glorious thing with the right kind of light on it. So again, it's hard to have patience when you install something, you have brand new slides, a brand new piece, and sometimes it's useful to have those brand new pieces in. But I would definitely, if you have the opportunity, go back and rephotograph this. And then
Paula brought this up on this one as well, and we've talked about it on one of our other previous reviews as well. The way we're looking at these slides right now, on your screen, it's a horizontal view. You can get a lot more bang for your buck using a horizontal image than using a a portrait type image. This is not a bad photograph here, but you get a better sense of the scale here. And I think Paul actually brought up that there's the landscaping around this piece now has grown in. And so it's worth going back out to re-photograph it again now that it's in its sort of final lush setting. And that'll give her a much more impactful wide shot photograph of this work.
We talked
a lot about photography.
You also, yes, you also both talked about, hiring a professional. That's part of your budget if you get one of these, and hire a professional photographer. Mary talked about, or I can't remember, Katie or Mary talked about actually hiring a photographer who photographs architecture. A lot of my small pieces are photographed professionally, and I don't know why. I don't know. I'm just a moron.
And also, if when you're hiring a photographer, and an architectural photographer was both of our suggestion, be clear about what you want from the photographer. If there's specific, like I want a detail shot, I want something that shows the shadows. I want one picture that's from this angle. I want all of them horizontal. And the more you can tell the architect the photographer what you want, the better those slides will be. The more helpful they'll be for you to communicate the things that you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, and I thought Mary's advice about look at other artists' websites look at other public artists' websites and how their photography is shot,
Yeah.
sunset versus sunrise, what angles they're shooting from. That can help you know what to tell your photographer. And you
Yeah.
can even show them like, here, this is this artist's website, and say, this is the kind of shots I'm looking for.
Yeah. I would also say, when you're communicating to the photographer, make sure that they understand that as something they're using to submit for competitions, you want an honest representation of what that piece actually is in the context of the site. So don't add things that aren't there. Don't take away things that are. If there's a post that's right there, that post is part of the site. So I would, the photographers sometimes want to make everything a little too clean and neat and perfect and not quite accurate. And I think there's a line there. You want to present your stuff in the best way possible, but also show the actual situation. Because as public artists, we put things in really weird situations, right? And we want to be able to say, this is how I responded to this particular context.
It's actually really helpful for a panel to see if you're placing a public art in a difficult location with a lot of, I don't know,
Visual stimulation.
overhead power lines, and the artwork still works and stands for itself, then that tells that panel you know how to solve contextual problems.
Yeah.
And that can be really helpful.
I want to go. I think the slide of the river piece on the building with the shadows. Yeah, it's really hard for me because the thing I was saying about Dan's about clarity of image. If I glance at this, it may be hard for somebody who's never seen this piece to distinguish what is the sculpture and what is the shadow. And it's tricky because if you saw this in real life, you'd be moving past it. It would be very obvious where the shadow is and the piece is because they're moving past each other. On the other hand, I don't want to take this piece when there's no shadow there, because that's what's amazing, not the thing, but it's one of the things that's amazing about this piece is how it activates this very big wall with a very fine piece of metal. And it's taking advantage of the New Mexican light. That's kind of fantastic. So it wasn't an advice of don't take a shadow or don't use this image. It's how do you solve this particular problem? And maybe it's finding the very right day when the light's just a little softer and the shadow's just a little bit softer. Maybe it's finding a time of day when the shadows are raking in a way that makes it clear which is which piece. I don't quite know what the answer is, but it's something to think about. How to kind of reduce visual chances of people misunderstanding what is what, but at the same time, in this case, showing off what this piece does really well. And I guess talking about shadows, her very last piece, the one on the Cradock building. I think both Katie and I completely went, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, just completely loved these two images. As somebody on a panel, often we're looking for pieces that will go into a challenging space, as we were talking about, or interact either with the building or a light rail station or whatever. And this piece shows how well she can work with context, both in the building as a whole, and then also working with context of taking advantage of the sun in a place by making this thing, that this piece has made this place active in a way that it wasn't before. And the other thing about these two pictures is that photographs is that they're both very visually striking images just on their own. So yeah, we love these.
Although portrait.
Oh yeah, portrait. Well, this is tricky though, because it's very possible that this image just works better as a horizontal, because I'm imagining this thing as a portrait. You might get so much of the other building that you wouldn't be able to tell what was happening. So I would say that's like a 9 out of 10 rule. Like, try to make everything portrait unless there's a very specific reason why you shouldn't, and then break it. But that's just kind of a general
advice.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we get to this one. We've got one question for you, Paula, and then we've got to move on to Tom Gormally, so we have time for him. We've got a question. Where did it go? Who is doing your laser cutting of your steel?
Hydrocut in Belen, New Mexico. Craig Orsman. Call him up. He would be happy to do yours. He's awesome. He's from Manhattan and somehow found his way to New Mexico.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much, Paula. I appreciate it. We will come back to everyone at the end for questions as well, but I want to make sure we have time for Tom to present his work. So Tom, please take it away.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Am I on mute?
You're good.
I'm good? Okay. I am studied as a sculptor after being discharged from the military, post-Vietnam War, disabled veteran. And this piece, I think what I'll do is I went back to school, studied sculpture, and have mainly been a gallery artist and a museum artist. But I have been invited to do some work for some pieces that were celebrating certain things. This piece called Watching the River Flow was done during the Belfast peace process. And they invited artists from, I think, about 20 countries. And you landed in Belfast and you had 30 days to choose a site and build a piece and erect it for the opening. This piece is about 18 feet high and about 8 feet wide and 12 feet deep. And I built it. So what I did, I had to go out and buy tools from a local hardware store. So I built this piece with hand tools in a hallway of a studio building. That's what they gave me. Nobody had studio space for me. So I built this in modules and then hauled them to the site and constructed it on site. So a lot of times you run into problems of the biggest problem with this was bolting this through this chair into the building, because the building walls were about 2.5 feet thick. It's an abandoned quarry that was along the Lagan River in Belfast. So this was the piece that I did. So this was the Horsehead International Sculpture Exhibition, is what it was called. And they invited me to be an artist not only in Belfast, but in Seattle before they went to Belfast. So I did this piece right before I went to Belfast. And it was just a back-to-back flurry of work. The piece was called Maybe Smell a Rose. And it is about 30 feet by 8 feet by 10 feet. And came out of a conversation that I had with my son, one of my sons, and I asked him about what people from his generation, what they were concerned about. My work carries a lot of social, political, environmental concerns. He said that they were most worried about the environment. So from the inside of this kind of monocular tube, from the small side of it, the small chair, the child side of it, you looked out onto this wonderful landscape. When you look through from the big side where the big chair was, all of the trees were clear cut behind it visually. So there's carved phones, there's carved light bulbs and light. And the little square above the small chair there, the sun comes through it at a certain time of the day, it lights up that little chair. The title on that was funny. Came from my 3-year-old son at the time, because he didn't want to leave a park, and I said, well, we can come back. We can do anything you want. What would you like to do? And he said, maybe smell a rose. This piece is called Launch. I was a ski jumper when I was a kid in Minnesota. And I also worked for a biotech. So I used to collect all of the glass beakers that they were ready to throw out. This piece is about 11 feet high and, 8 feet deep. But it had to do with what was going on as far as biotechnology and the dangers of biotechnology, and trying to be cognizant of where that goes and the kids in the future. This piece actually goes back, it's funny, this goes back to New Mexico. When I was in the military, I was stationed in New Mexico, and I went to the Museum of New Mexico Folk Art, and I saw these folk art death carts there that were just amazing. And that stuck with me for about 40 years. And I finally was able to do something with it. And also the crutches there was a church in Chama there where people hung their crutches on the wall when blessings were answered, or when they were healed from certain things. So I used to collect these crutches from secondhand shops, and that's what I used on the spokes on the big wheel. What I liked about the crutches when I started collecting them is all the very, very minute differences in the crutches, but the design. Some of these crutches went back to the turn of the century, and all of the smaller crutches that are in the cart, I made all of those crutches, and they're all the same size. And I saw them as, as folks being healed. This piece was called Life's Picnic, and it's about 12 feet high and 24 feet long. And then I kind of while I was building that on site, I realized that those elements were more sculptural if I spread them out, or rather than just setting it in as a picnic table. The housing in the back there, this was an old Navy base that this was built on. And the housing in the back was being turned into housing for mothers and children from domestic violence. These are some gallery pieces. This is going to be in a museum show in Iowa. I have a museum show there coming up in end of August. My wife and I have she's a painter. We have over 75 works in the show. So we're in the middle of getting ready for that and getting this work out to Iowa. And we'll be visiting artists there. And actually I'll let you guys know about this. There was the University of Northern Iowa is starting a new artists in residence program. And they've asked me to be their first resident there. And it's a month-long residency where you work with students, and students are there to help you build whatever you want to build. So if you want to use different materials, if you want to do something larger, they will help you out with that. But this piece was called Fox in the Hen House. This came from our past, what we've been through in the past 4 years politically. So this is all carved wood with lighted. I like using lighted elements in my pieces, and they add another layer of texture to what I'm doing. This is like a small piece from that Fox series too. I can see doing some of these foxes. I'd love to do some of these foxes like 20 feet high. Like just the fox leaning on the truth there would be enough for me. But the tree of life in the back there with the little animals coming out of it, there's a bough on the end of that. And I saw that bough while I was in Ireland. It was in the Book of Kells, and it was from a bough from the tree of life. So I've used things that I've found in my travels. They find their way back into work. This was 20 years later after I'd seen this. This is a piece called In a Memoriam to a Fox. And this was just bought by a museum. So it's going to find a nice home. This was the start of that whole Fox series that I was doing. And it was that social political element was flowing over into a lot of this work. I've usually used wood and wood carving and electronics and things like that in my work. But I'd like to start doing larger works and using different materials so that they can go outdoors.
I think this is the last slide here. So Mary, could you and Tom sort of recreate a little bit of your conversation that we had?
I think there were a couple of things that I thought that Tom's work did really, really well. I think because we're on this slide, let's talk about one is that these carved elements with the foxes, the figurative things, have a level of charm that's extraordinarily useful as a tool in public art. And I think the combination of these biomorphic characters combined with the kind of structural things is really interesting because it shows me that he has the kind of skill and the mindset to do storytelling sort of things, but that's combined with an understanding of like how materials go together and how, like in the first image of the, well, I'll skip that. But so I think that showing both these small scale things, even though, you know, I would also love to see a 25-foot fox, but it's perfectly fine to show a 6-inch fox because it shows this understanding of how to create these characters, which I think is just fantastic. And also with light, I think that this is a really nice way of showing things that it's very easy for a jury to imagine something at a bigger scale. Going back to the very first slide of the chair resting against the wall. This ordinarily, I tend to tell people to focus in and crop in on the thing you're supposed to be looking at, that chair. but this particular photograph does something really amazingly well, and it's showing a piece of art in its broader context. And I think in this particular case, all the extra stuff is actually helping you understand what the chair is doing. And it's so much more interesting for me to see the chair with the big walkway and the river and the industrial stuff behind it, rather than just the chair. This combined with the next photograph, which was just the chair. When people ask me about, if before you have that first big public permanent commission, how do you get it? You demonstrate that you have good three-dimensional design skills, that you understand context, and that you can do that on a much shorter or smaller budget if you're doing temporary projects. And so either build something in your backyard, like Dan did, or look for temporary commissions. A lot of cities have things where they'll give you a couple $1,000s, you make something for a short amount of time. And this chair is a spectacular example of that, which is something that demonstrates all those skills that you'll need to know, that helps a jury show, to imagine what you might do in if you were given a bigger permanent project.
One of the things that I wanted to mention about this piece too is I was in Belfast, and it was right during the peace process. There was still a lot of violence and a lot of marching in the street. There were some riots that happened. We got caught on one side of town one night and couldn't get back. I wanted to do something like really make a strong political statement about what I was seeing there. But then I realized that it wasn't my place. I'm not Irish. I'm of Irish heritage. But I thought, what do I bring here? And so I thought, what I bring here is I'm a pretty laid back guy. And I really enjoy spending time with people and relaxing when I'm not working. And that was what I wanted to bring to those people in Ireland, was to stop and take a moment and sit back and look at the beautiful environment that you're living in. It's on this river with the mountains in the background.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, Tom, because I think that was the thing that really struck me about your whole presentation when we talked and looked through the stuff was the story, was your personal backstory, and how much all the things you've gone through inform your ability to understand particular contexts. And it's not that you're without opinions and attitudes and strong ideas. Those are shown in other images, but you understand when it makes sense to talk about those things and when it makes sense to let other people discuss that and figure out what the appropriate response is. And it's using the photo descriptions, and also using your statement to show who you are as an artist and show the qualities, the personal qualities that make you a particularly good candidate for a public art project. Do that. It's nice to know that you know how to build something, or that you've done X number of projects wherever. But the thing that I want to look for in a statement is who that person is, why they're particularly passionate about this particular project, and kind of the just general generous attitude that they might bring to a project. This image I think is glorious. It shows the what the project is very clearly, and it also is a very pretty picture. Both Katie and I noticed the really, really beautiful shadow play on the side of that from the trees. And that's the thing, like that's part of the project. That's part of the way people will experience the project. And that's you want to entice the jury visually with anything you can to make your slides just visually pleasing. And this is a very good job of documenting the project and also being a really nice photograph. A couple of Tom's photographs are from slides. They're older, and there's a particular quality of them. Sometimes the colors get a little bit skewed. I think in the picnic bench ones, I think are a good example of that. There's something you can do with that to tweak the colors in Photoshop that will make them look less aged. Typically the blues tend to be washed out, so you can use the Photoshop to kind of bring those back and make them just look more kind of consistent with the rest of your photographs. Because you look at the foxes, they're obviously more contemporary photographs where the colors are balanced. So just make sure that over your slides that they kind of read as much of a consistent story as you can. And some of those, you know, if it's a temporary project that's been gone for a long time, there's not much you can do, but there is some readjusting you can do to make it kind of look less obviously like a scan.
While we're on this image, we had a question on this project. Is this material all, is it all carved wood?
It's well carved and fabricated. Yeah.
Carved, fabricated.
Yeah.
So it's all wood.
Yeah, I think the one.
So what I used on like the phones and the light bulbs and stuff like that was some old growth straight grain fir that somebody had gifted me, and I wanted to bring that element into the piece.
Yeah, these carved elements on this piece are so important, and there's so much charm. Like I want to see that phone close up. So it if there were images, I think we chose this one or another one. Anything you can do to help the jury see those particular details is a really good thing. You had the one shot of the whole piece that people understand the context of what it is, and then use a detail shutter to bring them into the specifics. And then you know, in the description you can write a little bit about what exactly you're seeing: hand carved wood pieces, and maybe a line about the concept behind it.
So I want to make sure we have a little time to close out, and we're running out. But Tom, is there anything else that you really particularly took away from our conversation with Mary that you want to emphasize?
Actually, the idea of getting some of those photographs redone. I'm having some of those photographs redone right now. There's a lot of, and you know, she was. Her exuberance about my work and wanting to see it in public. I haven't done public artwork much. I've done some, you know, some commissions for clients, but I've never done big professional works. These were like invitations for site specific. They lasted less than a month. Actually, that big chair in Ireland lasted less than 3 days. It was torn to pieces. Yeah.
I want to, Katie, I'm pretty sure you wanted to talk about this particular photograph because of the person.
Well, yeah, that's one thing that I wanted to bring up. Anonymity is pretty important in a lot of calls to artists. And in our conversation with Tom, we learned that that is actually a picture of Tom. And I probably would not have known that when reviewing an application, but just be aware when you're applying to public art projects, some programs require these to be totally anonymous. And so if there's a photograph of yourself in your work, that could potentially disqualify your application from review. So just something to keep in mind. It's okay to have people in the pictures, just make sure they're not you if you need to apply to an anonymous call. I probably wouldn't do a Google search and know that this was Tom, but you never know, you might.
I have a couple things. One, I think in that particular picture, it's really nice to have a person in it. It shows scale and how people can use the environment. It was just, I didn't actually know that requirement about no personal images, so it was nice to hear that from Katie. There were two things I think that came up for me with Tom's work. One is, I think sometimes there's a question with a lot of artists that have done big public artwork is like, well, I don't know how to weld something that's 30 feet high, so I can't do public art. I don't fabricate any of my own pieces. I work with fabricators that I trust to know how to do that. What I do have as a skill set is I have a general understanding of how things are put together, and I'm really good at communication. So I'll have an ongoing conversation with the fabricator that helps me figure out what it is that can be built. And Tom has so much experience, like he was talking about in our longer conversation, that giant wheel. He learned about wheelwrighting in order to build that. Tom obviously has an enthusiasm and understanding for how things go together, and whether that's a piece of wood at this scale or steel at this scale, it translates. It's just kind of the way your mind works. So if you have that kind of general inclination towards problem solving, that's the kind of thing that's really handy, not necessarily the experience of building something X feet high. And the other thing,
and also
yeah.
his work shows what he's interested in. He's interested in statements about politics and social issues, and that is like, if that is something your panel is interested in, they'll pick up on that because that is reflected in
That's
his
lovely.
work.
Yeah, and it done in this place in using metaphor, which allows for more open-ended and richer layers of meaning, which I think, as somebody who consumes art, I always really love. And I don't.
Your comment about Tom Otterness's work was very. I took that to heart. Yeah.
Yeah, the artist Tom Otterness, who I love, works a lot with using charm in order to create kind of layered meanings that he's able to talk about some trickier issues that may be more difficult to talk about in more of a blatant way. The other thing, I don't remember who it was. I think it might have been Tom, or maybe it wasn't Tom. Anyway, one of the three of you, we were talking about the number of times somebody who had applied for projects, and they were like, "Oh, I applied for like, yeah, I applied for 20 or 30 projects and I haven't gotten any." Every time I do one of these panels, I always tell people, when I was kind of working my way up to having a full load of public artwork, I would be applying for about 50 a year, and I'd be getting about 1 a year, so about 2% response rate, which was actually pretty good. And if you're applying for City of Phoenix, you may be up against 200 other people. So if you're applying for 20 projects just by the odds, don't feel bad. So my number one piece of advice is anything that looks like it's a good call for you, it's a decent fit, that's kind of in your area, that's the right price range, that is something that calls to you, is like, boy, I really love swimming pools, I want to do something at a swimming pool. If you're applying to those kind of things where you're excited about it, apply to it, and then literally forget that you applied. And if they call you, great. Otherwise, it's just going to be driving you nuts. And so that's what I've done, and it's managed to help my sanity over a couple of decades.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for sharing your work.
Thank you for all of your feedback too, and for ICS or ISC posting this. It was really, really wonderful.
Nicole, do we have any other questions in the chat box? I'm not seeing any in the public chat box.
Nope, I'm not seeing any.
Okay. Ed, will you close us out?
Nice to see everybody. I'm Ed Liebod, run the public art program with the office. I just want to thank all of the artists who have been involved in this. Obviously, Tom and Pam and Dan today, it's really sweet of you and kind of you to share your work with us. And Mary, it's great to have you share your insights about their work. This has been, I think, a deep and good conversation for all. This brings to an end our month of portfolio reviews. I think based on everyone's responses thus far, we're hoping to do this again in the future with more artists. And so I would say keep an eye on the Sculpture Center and keep an eye on the Office of Arts and Culture for those. Obviously, this wouldn't have happened without Katie and Jeanette and Nicole working really closely together to coordinate all of this. So a round of applause for you folks. You really have done a great job in pulling this together and helping to make this go seamlessly. And I would say that on that note of opportunities, we have an opportunity that's up right now. It's for artists to apply for the opportunity to design shade structures that will be incorporated into standard city bus shelters. So find your way to the City of Phoenix website. It's phoenix.gov/arts, and then look for opportunities, and you'll find that call there. It's on Cafe. And I would also encourage everyone to get on our mailing list so that you can keep up to date on all the news that's coming out of our Office of Arts and Culture and any opportunities that might sort of pique your interest. And with that, Jeanette or Nicole, do you have any parting thoughts on this great month of portfolio reviews?
No, I just want to say thank you again to you and the Phoenix Office of Arts and Culture for collaborating on these. And just thank you to all of our panelists who worked closely with each of these artists, and to the bravery of these artists who shared their portfolios on this platform. And I would say keep an eye out for future collaborations.